Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Friday, October 25th, 2024. Both major presidential nominees, former President Donald Trump of the Republican Party, Vice President Kamala Harris of the Democratic Party, campaign in Texas, driving home the issues they want to highlight in the final days before the election. Border security for Donald Trump, reproductive rights for Kamala Harris. New York's 22nd Congressional District may be a key to any chance of Democrats winning control of the U.S. House in this election. It's the only House race where an incumbent Republican is predicted to lose. We'll hear from the candidates and talk with reporter Robert Harding with The Citizen out of Auburn, New York. President Joe Biden at Gila River Indian Community in Arizona formally apologizes for the 150-year history of the federal government forcing tens of thousands of Native American children to leave their families and go to boarding schools. The president saying the federal Indian boarding school policy, the pain it has caused, will always be a significant mark of shame, a blot on American history. Secretary of State Antony Blinken meets in London with the Jordanian foreign minister, talking about conflicts in the Middle East. And NASA Administrator Bill Nelson is asked about reports that SpaceX owner Elon Musk has been in close contact with Russian President Vladimir Putin the past few years. Story from the Austin American-Statesman that Democrat Kamala Harris and Republican Donald Trump will bring their presidential campaigns to Texas on Friday, not so much because they see the state as a competitive battleground, but rather as a launching pad to amplify their closing messages. The dueling visits, Trump in Austin and Harris in Houston, feature star power aimed at generating excitement and turnout by highlighting the issues that have been front and center in each candidate's campaign 11 days before the November 5th election. That was from the Austin American-Statesman newspaper. Donald Trump held an event in Austin during which he spoke about immigration and border security.
But over the past 4 years, this state has become Kamala's staging ground to import her army of migrant gangs and illegal alien criminals into every state in America, and every state's a border state. You've heard that. It's true. Paving a trail of bloodshed, suffering, and death all across our land. And it's only getting worse. It's just incredible when you look at the numbers. 21 million people at least during this 3.5-year period. And many of them, as you know, are murderers, drug dealers, people from jails. They're letting their people out of jails and bringing them right into our country. We're like a dumping ground. What Kamala Harris has done on our border is cruel, it's vile, and it's absolutely heartless. Her policy of importing migrant gangs is a crime against our country. It's actually a crime against humanity, and her abolition of our border should disqualify her for even running. I mean, I don't know how you can run for the president of the United States and allow people to pour into our country. And we're talking about seriously criminal people, many of these people, and they come from all over the world. It's not just South America. They're coming in from Africa. They're coming in from the Middle East. The Congo, that's a hot place right now. A lot of people coming in from prisons in the Congo. They're coming into our country. It's not even believable, actually, when you think, you're standing up here, you're saying this stuff, John Barrasso, but you're saying this, and you say to yourself, is it even believable? It's sort of like, actually in a smaller way, but still very important, men playing in women's sports. Who would want that? But, 10 years ago, you would never say that. And then you have the transgender operations all over the place. And you're saying this, and you have parental guidance. And we want our child to be parentally guided. And you have to make apologies for the fact that they're not. But they're going to be, and we're going to bring that back. We want our parents. But, if you go back 10 years or 15 years ago, if you ever made a speech like that, they'd say, this guy's crazy. What is he talking about? Those things would never happen, and they didn't happen until a certain time ago with the radical left. No person who is responsible for so much bloodshed on our own soil can ever be allowed to become president of the United States. And I think she's coming here today. She doesn't want to go to a swing state because she's losing so badly in those states, so she decided to come to Texas, and I'm sure she'll be treated very nicely. Today, she picked the wrong place. I think she picked the wrong place. What do I know about politics? I haven't done it that long, actually. But today, Kamala is here in Texas to rub shoulders with woke celebrities. Isn't that exciting? But she's not going to meet with any of the victims of migrant crime while she's here. We have many of them right here, the families. We have many of them.
Donald Trump, Republican presidential nominee, at a rally today in Austin, Texas. We'll hear from the Democratic presidential nominee, Kamala Harris, in just a moment. But first, from Fox News, a federal judge on Friday ordered Virginia to halt its removal of potential non-citizens from state voter rolls, a decision expected to restore the voting rights to some 1,600 residents ahead of Election Day. U.S. Judge Patricia Giles issued a preliminary injunction Friday to reinstate all voters that had been removed from state voter rolls in the state in the last 90 days, finding that the removals had been, in fact, systemic, not individualized, and were thus a violation of federal law. In issuing the injunction, Giles said there is reason to believe voters were being mistakenly removed from the polls. She said this process has resulted in eligible voters having their voting registration flagged. And while Giles concurred it is undoubtedly in the public interest for ineligible voters to be removed, she noted it is also in the public interest for states to comply with federal law, particularly the right to vote. That was the reporting from Fox News. Governor Glenn Youngkin, Republican of Virginia, went on Fox News via phone to say the state will appeal.
This is a stunning ruling by a federal judge who is ordering Virginia to reinstate individuals who have self-identified as non-citizens back on the voter rolls. And what's even more astounding is the vast majority of these folks had presented immigration documents confirming that they were non-citizens, and we recently had that verified by federal authorities. So here we are with a judge saying, put people back on the voter rolls who you know are non-citizens. And this is under a law in Virginia that's been in effect since 2006. It has been applied by Republican and Democrat governors alike into this 90-day period. And here we are 11 days before a presidential election, and a federal judge is ordering them back on the voter rolls. It's astounding to me that this could possibly happen. I mean, listen, common sense says non-citizens aren't on the voter rolls, but the Constitution and the law say it as well. And that's why we are immediately petitioning the Fourth Circuit for an emergency stay here on this injunction. And we will immediately go to the U.S. Supreme Court if necessary.
Governor Glenn Youngkin, Republican from Virginia, in a phone interview today with Fox News Channel. From Associated Press, Vice President Kamala Harris will head to reliably Republican Texas just 10 days before Election Day in an effort to refocus her campaign against former President Donald Trump on reproductive care, which Democrats see as a make-or-break issue this year. Her campaign says that Harris will visit Houston for an event Friday with women who have been affected by the state's restrictive abortion laws, which took effect after the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade in 2022. She'll be going there after spending time in Georgia, another state with a restrictive law. That was from Associated Press. Vice President Harris spoke to reporters in Houston this afternoon.
Well, it's good to be in Texas, and we are here because obviously it is a very important state, and we are here to really highlight that, sadly, the elected leaders of Texas, a lot of them, have made Texas ground zero in this fundamental fight for the freedom of women to make decisions about their own body. So tonight we will be discussing the impact of that, not only to the women of Texas and their families, but to people around the country because of Trump abortion bans. And I do believe it is critically important to acknowledge that this is not just a political debate. This is not just some theoretical concept. Real harm has occurred in our country. A real suffering has occurred. People have died. And it is important to highlight this issue because this is among the most critical issues that the American people will address when they vote for who will be the next president of the United States. So I will be talking about the harm. I will be talking about those who have been directly impacted. And I will also tonight be talking with the American people about the power that you, the American people, have to make a decision about the future course of our country. And do we all agree that there are just certain decisions the government should not be making for individuals and their families? I also do want to address the comment that Donald Trump made about America being the trash can of the world, whatever he said, something along those lines. It's just another example of how he really belittles our country. This is someone who is a former president of the United States, who has a bully pulpit, And this is how he uses it to tell the rest of the world that somehow the United States of America is trash. And I think, again, the President of the United States should be someone who elevates discourse and talks about the best of who we are and invests in the best of who we are. Not someone like Donald Trump who's constantly demeaning and belittling who the American people are. America deserves better.
Vice President Kamala Harris, Democratic presidential nominee in Houston, Texas, with reporters. That rally she mentioned tonight in Houston will be live on C-SPAN television and the free C-SPAN Now mobile app, scheduled to begin about 9:30 p.m. Eastern. Story from the New York Post. House Speaker Mike Johnson and the Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell are calling out Kamala Harris for escalating threats against former President Donald Trump by labeling him a fascist and promoting claims that he is like Nazi dictator Adolf Hitler. Johnson and McConnell, the leaders of the Republicans in each house, said in a joint statement, Vice President Harris may want the American people to entrust her with the sacred duty of executive authority, but first she must abandon the base and irresponsible rhetoric that endangers both American lives and institutions. We have both been briefed on the ongoing and persistent threats to former President Donald Trump by adversaries to the United States, and we call on the Vice President to take these threats seriously, stop escalating the threat environment, and help ensure President Trump has the necessary resources to be protected from those threats. That was the story from the New York Post. Vice President Harris was asked about this today in Houston.
Mitch McConnell and Speaker Mike Johnson put out a statement comparing rhetoric that you have been using, comparing it to the man who's accused of an attempted assassination on your opponent, Donald Trump. Do you take their criticism seriously?
Well, listen, we all must speak out against any form of political violence, and I'm very clear about that. No one should be the subject of violence, much less political violence. But the American people deserve to be presented with facts and the truth. And the fact and the truth is that some of the people closest to Donald Trump when he was president, generals, including most recently John Kelly, a 4-star Marine general, have been very clear about the danger and the threat that Donald Trump poses to America and the fact that he is unfit to serve. And the American people deserve to hear that and know about that so they can make a decision based on what's in the best interest of themselves and their families.
Vice President Kamala Harris speaking to reporters in Houston, Texas today. After tonight's rally in Houston, she'll be returning to Philadelphia this weekend. It'll be her 20th visit to Pennsylvania this year, showing how important that state is in the presidential contest. It has 19 electoral votes, and the polls show a virtual tie between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. C-SPAN spoke this morning with Politics PA managing editor Steve Ulrich about why Pennsylvania is called the swingiest of the swing states.
Pennsylvania has gone back and forth. In 2016, Pennsylvania, after voting twice in 2008 and 2012 for Barack Obama, tipped the scale and voted for Donald Trump. In 2020, the Commonwealth went and voted for Joe Biden versus Donald Trump. So all eyes are on the Commonwealth right now as to which way Pennsylvania is going to lean, and there are a few bellwether counties that we're really keeping an eye on at either end of the state.
We're showing our viewers right now the 2020 presidential results in the state of Pennsylvania. As you said, the current president, Joe Biden, won that state 50% over the former president, 48.84% for the former president. How many votes did this come down to?
In all, it was about 88,000 votes. And in 2016, it was 40,000 votes. So we don't know which way Pennsylvania is going to go. When you look at Pennsylvania's 67 counties, 55 of them trend Republican. But it's the largest population centers, whether it's in the west in Allegheny County, where Pittsburgh is located, in the city of Philadelphia and the surrounding suburbs, or where Democrats dominate. So the eyes of the country right now are really focused on a couple of counties in Pennsylvania. When you look at our northwest corner, Erie County, and along the Pennsylvania-New Jersey border, Northampton County. Those two counties both went for Trump in 2016, both went for Biden in 2020. Will they tell the story in 2024? we're certainly focused on that.
Let's look at Pennsylvania's voter party registration numbers. So over 9 million registered voters. Democrats make up 44% of that. Republicans, 40% of that. No affiliation is 12%. Talk about these numbers. How have they changed since 2020? And what do they mean when we are 11, 12 days out?
We've really seen a growth in the Commonwealth for Republicans. Democrats, even as early as the 4th of July, had a 600,000 margin when it came to voter registration. Since on Monday, when the last numbers came out, that number has shrunk to 300,000. So we're seeing more people leave the Democratic Party and go Republican, but we're also seeing a large growth among those who are non-affiliated, the independents. Yes, there are some that are affiliating with third parties, but independents right now make up over 1.1 million voters in the state. And that's who Kamala Harris and Donald Trump and their campaigns are really targeting, trying to figure out which way they're going to lean on November 5th.
Is it too late to register to vote in Pennsylvania?
It is too late to register to vote in Pennsylvania. Our registration deadline was Monday, but voters who are registered have until next Tuesday to be able to request a mail-in ballot, a no-excuse absentee mail-in ballot. The challenge, if you wait that long, and the deadline is 5 o'clock next Tuesday, the deadline is the pressure becomes filling out your ballot and then dropping it in the mail. There's no guarantee it would arrive to your election office by 8 p.m. on election night, and that is a requirement. It has to be in the hands of the election office by the closing of polls on election night. Postmarks for the U.S. mail do not count in that situation. So you can still be involved. You can still ask for a no-excuse mail-in ballot, but registration is closed.
Steve Ulrich, managing editor of Politics PA on C-SPAN's Washington Journal this morning. All this week, the Washington Journal has been looking at the 7 presidential battleground states, one per day. This morning was Pennsylvania. We've already done Michigan, Georgia, Arizona, Wisconsin, and Nevada. And Saturday morning finishes out with North Carolina. It's live at 8 a.m. Eastern Saturday on C-SPAN Radio and Television. You can also find all our Battleground Series interviews at C-SPAN's Campaign Trail podcast, available wherever you get your podcasts. State Newsroom reports that nearly 30 million Americans by Thursday had cast their ballots ahead of Election Day, with 13 million choosing to vote in person at early voting centers and another 17 million submitting mail-in ballots, according to data from the University of Florida's Election Lab. The total number of early votes is expected to increase significantly in the days leading up to the Election Day on November 5th. That was from the state's newsroom. New York Times has a headline, Democrats' best shot at flipping a House seat is in upstate New York. The subhead is, after redistricting, Representative Brandon Williams of New York is the only House Republican whose race is considered lean Democrat. Well, coming up, we'll talk with a reporter with the Auburn New York Citizen newspaper about this House race. First, here's some of the debate the candidates held on Tuesday, hosted by WSYR-TV in Syracuse. Republican Congressman Williams is being challenged by John Mannion, a Democratic state senator.
The airwaves, as you both know, have been infiltrated with political ads funded both by your campaigns and action committees. Congressman Williams wants to ban abortion in New York, is one claim. Congressman Williams plans to cut Medicare and Social Security. Senator Mannion is an Albany abuser. Senator Mannion lets out violent criminals and defunds police. Address these attacks head on. Which one is most leading about your character and policies? Senator Mannion gets to answer first.
Thank you. So first of all, let's talk about the law enforcement piece here. Number one, I've been endorsed by law enforcement in every single one of my elections, including this one. Number two, I have supported law enforcement all along. I have strengthened our bail laws, which were passed prior to me being in office. We've given judges more discretion, we've made more crimes bail eligible, and we've addressed the reoffending issue. I have created the first police force in over 50 years in New York State with my legislation as at the Syracuse Regional Airport Authority. On the other attacks that have come against me that are unfounded and have been investigated and unproven, my opponent and his friends' actions are disgusting. They're untruthful. They should be rejected. And what we've seen is the infiltration of nasty politics representative of places like Texas that should be rejected. It's a cowardly act and should have stopped a long time ago.
Congressman Williams, you get a minute also to address these attacks head on, the attacks against you.
So they've spent now $4 million lying about my statements and record on abortion. I've been absolutely clear and consistent, Andrew, even here in this studio over the last 2 years. I will not support a national ban on abortion, and I've said that clearly. I won't vote for a national ban. I support exceptions for abortion for life of the mother, rape and incest, and I still am pro-life by my faith. And so, but to spend $4 million saying things that I never said is just fear-mongering. And it is such a disservice to women and to lie to women. They've also said I will cut Social Security when, in fact, I've crossed the aisle to strengthen Social Security and had done that just in the last 2 months. To stand up against my party for the Social Security Fairness Act. The ethics charges against my opponent are absolutely true, and they're absolutely serious, and those women deserve to be heard.
Congressman Brandon Williams, Republican from New York, debating Democratic State Senator John Mannion at Thursday's debate in Syracuse. Joining us now to talk about this close race in New York's 22nd Congressional District is Robert Harding, government and public policy reporter with The Citizen in Auburn, New York. Thanks for being with us. Let's start with the district. Boundary lines were changed since Congressman Williams narrowly won 2 years ago. What happened?
Yeah, so the district went slightly from slight increase in enrollment for Democratic advantage, that is, in enrollment, and the geographic lines changed. So actually where I am in Cayuga County, we weren't part of the now former 22nd district. So this part of Cayuga County, which is the southern part of the district in the city of Auburn, was added in, and also a portion of Cortland County in the city of Cortland in central New York. They also changed Oneida County, which is near, which includes the city of Utica. Before, the entirety of Oneida County was in the district. Now it's been essentially, kind of sliced and diced, and so now just the portion where Utica is and some nearby towns is part of the district.
You wrote that the last poll you've seen puts this contest as a dead heat. We've seen some say it leans now Democrat. How has that affected the way the candidates campaign?
Well, I think you're seeing that now. Things are really heating up. There was a debate the other day where, the first couple of debates were, I would say both candidates were gentlemanly. They talked about the issues. It was mostly positive. There was some back and forth, some jabs, but it really heated up Tuesday. And I think that's a product of where the race stands right now, that you see that it some polls suggest it's close. There's, others out there saying there's internal Democratic polls that suggest that John Mannion has a bigger lead, and so that might be affecting how Brandon Williams campaigns, that he's going to be a little more aggressive and on the attack. But everything points right now, with all the money coming into the district, millions have been spent by outside groups, that this is certainly competitive. We'll see what Election Day brings and what the final results are, but it is a competitive race as it stands.
And what top issues are each candidate focusing on?
So looking at it from John Mannion's standpoint as the Democrat in the race, he's been talking a lot about abortion rights and contrasting that with Brandon Williams' record. And there have been some ads going after Brandon Williams suggesting that if reelected, that he would support a national abortion ban, which he has denied that he would support that, but that's been a common talking point used against him. On the Republican side, Brandon Williams has talked about border security and criticized the Biden administration for what he views as their failed policies, suggesting we need stronger measures to secure the border. There's also been, really some issues involving staffing. Both candidates have started to go after each other about how they've dealt with various staffing issues over the last couple of years. John Mannion has had allegations against him that he mistreated and abused staffers while a state senator. And of course, in Brandon Williams' case, there was a viral video of him confronting his former chief of staff at a party in Washington, D.C. So that's become more of a campaign issue in the final weeks here.
We're talking with Robert Harding from The Citizen in Auburn, New York. Are there any local issues that have gotten headlines?
Yeah, so one in particular that I think has gotten a lot of attention, really, this became an issue in 2022, but it's continued now, is Micron, and which is a semiconductor chip company that's planning this massive investment in central New York. And Senator Mannion has pointed to the fact that he supported a state-level bill that made this project a reality, that made it more appealing for Micron to come to New York. Brandon Williams, Congressman Williams, has pointed to what he's done the last couple years in Congress to help get this project going, and different steps he's taken to try and expedite the process. But there's also some comments that Brandon Williams made back in 2022 that the CHIPS and Science Act at the federal level is corporate welfare. And that's been used against him again, as it was 2 years ago, to suggest that while he may say he supports Micron, he might not support it strongly enough, or he's at least criticizing this legislation that made it all possible. So that's a really big issue locally that's come up again and used against Williams.
You mentioned that this race has gotten national attention because of its closeness and its possible significance in what party controls the House. What have you seen come in? Is it money? Is it people? Organization? What have you seen?
Yeah, so it's both. You see the outside groups spending lots of money representing the House majority PACs of the world on the Democratic side, the Congressional Leadership Fund on the Republican side, among others, and of course the campaign arms of both House Democrats and Republicans, spending millions of dollars on TV ads and other advertisements to reach voters. The candidates themselves have raised a lot of money. John Mannion just raised over $2 million in the most recent quarter, which is, I believe, a record for a candidate in this region. And you also see some leaders, different leaders coming in. Not too long ago, Jim Clyburn came to campaign with John Mannion here in Syracuse. Brandon Williams has had Republican leaders come and campaign with him in the past. Speaker Johnson has visited for sure, and those visits continue with other Republican and Democratic members of Congress in support of both candidates.
Robert Harding, government and public policy reporter with the Auburn Citizen. You can find his stories at auburnpub.com and on X at Robert Harding. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Story from CBS News. President Biden on Friday issued a formal presidential apology to Native American communities for the atrocities committed against indigenous children and their families during a 150-year era of forced federal Indian boarding schools. The president chose to speak at the Gila River Indian Community in Arizona, although he apologized to all tribal nations for their generations of suffering. From 1819 through the 1970s, the federal government and religious institutions established boarding schools throughout the country to assimilate Alaska Native, American Indian, and Native Hawaiian children into white American culture by forcibly removing them from their families, communities, and belief systems. Many children who attended these boarding schools endured emotional, physical, and sexual abuse, and hundreds of them died. And for those who did return home, they were wounded in body and spirit, Mr. Biden said. That was the reporting from CBS News. We'll hear from President Biden in a moment. Interior Secretary Deb Haaland, the first Native American cabinet secretary, also spoke at today's announcement.
Tens of thousands of indigenous children as young as 4 years old were taken from their families and communities and forced into boarding schools run by the U.S. government and religious institutions. These federal Indian boarding schools have impacted every indigenous person I know. Some are survivors, some are descendants, but we all carry the trauma that these policies and these places inflicted. This is the first time in history that a United States Cabinet Secretary has shared the traumas of our past, and I acknowledge that this trauma was perpetrated by the agency that I now lead. For decades, this terrible chapter was hidden from our history books. But now our administration's work will ensure that no one will ever forget.
Interior Secretary Deb Haaland at the Gila River Indian Community in Arizona. She also told the stories of her great-grandfather and maternal grandparents forced into Indian boarding schools. President Biden also spoke today, issuing the formal apology.
Generations of Native children stolen, taken away to places they didn't know, with people they never met, who spoke a language they had never heard. Native communities silenced. Their children's laughter and play were gone. Children would arrive at schools, their clothes taken off, their hair that they were told was sacred was chopped off, their names literally erased, replaced by a number or an English name. One survivor later recounted her days when taken away. She said, quote, "My mother, standing on that sidewalk as we loaded into a green bus, I can see the image of my mom burned into my mind and my heart where she was crying." Another survivor described what it was like at the boarding school. I quote, "When I would talk in my tribal language, I would get hit. I lost my tongue. They beat me every day. Children abused, emotionally, physically, and sexually abused, forced into hard labor. Some put up for adoption without the consent of their birth parents. Some left for dead in unmarked graves. And for those who did return home, they were wounded in body and in spirit. Trauma and shame passed down through generations. The policy continued even after the Civil Rights Act, which got me involved in politics as a young man, even after the Civil Rights Act was passed in 1964. It continued. All told, hundreds and hundreds of federal Indian boarding schools across the country. Tens of thousands of Native children entered the system. Nearly 1,000 documented Native child deaths, though the real number is likely to be much, much higher. Lost generations, culture and language, lost trust. It's horribly, horribly wrong. It's a sin on our soul. I'd like to ask, with your permission, for a moment of silence, as we remember those lost and the generations living with that trauma. After 150 years, the United States government eventually stopped the program. But the federal government has never formally apologized for what happened until today. I formally apologize as President of the United States of America for what we did. I formally apologize.
President Joe Biden at the Gila River Crossing School in the Gila River Indian Community in Arizona. An NBC News article about the Interior Department report. The investigation uncovered generations of trauma. It identified the deaths of at least 973 Native American, Alaska Native, and Native Hawaiian children who attended the boarding schools. In total, the probe identified 417 institutions across 37 states or then territories that were operational between 1819 and at least 1969. From NBC News. Washington Today continues in a moment.
This election night, C-SPAN delivers something different. Not just the presidential race, but the state races that will decide the balance of power in Congress. No political pundits, no spin, no commercials. Just the candidates, the results, and you. Follow C-SPAN this election night beginning at 7 p.m. Eastern. Live, Tuesday, November 5th, on TV, online, or on the free C-SPAN Now video app.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast on the free C-SPAN Now mobile app and wherever you get your podcasts. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken, writes Reuters, said on Friday there was a real sense of urgency in getting to a diplomatic solution to end the conflict in Lebanon between Israel and Iran-aligned Hezbollah, while calling for the protection of civilians. Speaking across from him before a bilateral meeting in London, Jordanian Foreign Minister Ayman Safadi told Blinken there was ethnic cleansing going on in northern Gaza, where Israeli forces have intensified their military campaign in recent weeks. The top U.S. diplomat is in Britain meeting Arab leaders following a tour of the Middle East this week, his first to the region since Israel killed Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar, suspected mastermind of the group's October 7, 2023 attack on Israel, which triggered the conflict across the region. That was from Reuters. Here is Secretary Blinken and the Jordanian Foreign Minister in London.
Well, good morning, everyone. As always, it's a great pleasure to see my colleague and my friend, Foreign Minister Safadi. Jordan is an essential partner for the United States in the region on so many issues, and of course, a critical partner in trying to provide the support that Palestinians so desperately need in Gaza. And we're working very closely together on maximizing that support, and Jordan has played a remarkable leadership role in doing that. We've had very good and important conversations this week, including this morning, on ending the war in Gaza and charting a path for what comes next. And those conversations will continue, but I think this is a moment of importance and urgency that we're working to seize. I also had the opportunity to speak to Prime Minister Mikati in Lebanon, and there too we have a sense of real urgency in getting to a diplomatic resolution and the full implementation of UN Security Council Resolution 1701, such that there can be real security along the border between Israel and Lebanon, and people both sides of the border can have the confidence to be able to return to their homes. And there as well, we are intensely engaged, and we are working hard to move this forward and get to that diplomatic resolution. So there is a lot going on, but as always, working closely with Jordan is a critical part in achieving the results that we both want to get. Ayman.
Thank you. Good morning to you all. Tony, good to see you again. And as you said, it is critical that we continue to engage. We count a lot on your role. Your leading role is essential for us to be able to get through the nightmare that the region continues to live. We really stand at the brink of regional war now. The only path to save the region from that is for Israel to stop the aggressions on Gaza, on Lebanon, stop unilateral measures, illegal measures on the West Bank that is also pushing the situation towards the abyss. We want this to end, and we want to be able to get to a place where we can really talk about achieving a just and lasting peace that will guarantee the security of all. But we meet at a very, very critical moment. As you mentioned, the humanitarian situation is really difficult. We look at northern Gaza now, where we do see ethnic cleansing taking place, and that has got to stop. In Lebanon, I think the Lebanese government is clear now. It wants to implement Resolution 1701, so that should be implemented and save, again, hundreds, thousands of lives that are being killed. And we see the displacement challenge in Lebanon that is going to challenge all of us as well. So ultimately, I think we are at a moment now where nothing justifies the continuation of the wars. The guns have to go silent. Diplomacy has to take precedence, and we've got to save the whole region from the abyss of what's going. As I said, your role is critical, and this is we continue our engagement with a view to making sure that things do not get any worse. But I think of utmost importance right now as we speak is to address the situation in northern Gaza, where we see the siege on the Kamala Harris hospital. Again, nothing justifies that. It's getting worse, unfortunately, every time we meet, not for lack of us trying, but because we do have an Israeli government that is not listening to anybody, and that has got to stop. So I hope today we'll be able to continue our conversations, again, in the very frank and open manner in which we always talk. The stakes are too high, and it's got to stop. So thank you so much.
Mr. Secretary, Mr. Secretary, do you think that Israel should stop the bombing in Beirut? Would that be a help?
Thank you, Press.
Minister, what do you think?
Thank you, Press.
Could we just get one comment? It's a long.
The most important thing is to drive toward the diplomatic resolution to get the understandings that are necessary for the full implementation of 1701. And the sooner we're able to do that, the sooner we're able to get a resolution. Meanwhile, we want to make sure, we want to see civilians protected. We want to make sure that Lebanese armed forces are not caught in the crossfire, and certainly we want to make sure that in places like Beirut, there is a real effort to make sure that people are not harmed, that civilians are not caught up in this crossfire.
And Minister Sabadi. Thank you, Press. And Minister Sabadi, comment.
The aggression in Lebanon has to stop immediately. Nothing justifies its continuation. Lebanon is ready to implement 1701. That will guarantee the security of all. My short answer is yes, it's got to stop now.
Should the U.S.
Thank you, Press. Thank you, Press. Thank you.
U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken and the Jordanian Foreign Minister meeting in London today. Story from CNN, the Committee to Protect Journalists issued a statement strongly condemning Israel after reports of the killing of 3 journalists in southern Lebanon on Friday. CPJ called for urgent international intervention, urging the global community to address what it described as Israel's long-standing pattern of impunity in cases involving the death of journalists. Lebanese state-run national news agency reported Friday that 3 journalists were killed overnight in an Israeli airstrike in southern Lebanon. That was from CNN. In Washington, D.C., Amos Hochstein, U.S. Special Envoy to Lebanon and Senior Advisor to President Biden for Energy and Investment, was interviewed by Marcus Brackley, former Washington Post executive editor and Semaphore news contributor, at a program hosted by Semaphore.
You were involved in creating this Lebanon-Israel maritime agreement, which you can talk a little bit about, but it clearly didn't forestall this conflict. And I wonder, these vestiges of the past, as you call them, can we overcome them? I mean, are you optimistic? Let's zero in on the conflicts around Israel, and particularly Israel-Lebanon conflict, which you've been involved in. Do you see any reason for hope for stability in that region? Particularly, is the maritime agreement sort of a glimpse of what could be but isn't going to be?
So I think the maritime agreement was extraordinary because it was the first agreement ever between Israel and Lebanon. They've never actually had an agreement. And it delineated the maritime boundary between the two countries, and they don't have a land boundary. I mean, there's a 1923 line, 1949 line, 2000 line, et cetera, but there's no actual boundary. So, and it was not intended to be a peace agreement. It intended to allow for economic development in the offshore so that international companies can come and develop, and that did work, and it's still there.
Just to be clear, it's for hydrocarbon. What is the?
It enabled both Lebanon and Israel to develop their hydrocarbons and their potential in their offshore without going to rockets flying, and that worked, right? Yeah. So it was a model that worked because it was bringing in the economic potential with the security issues. Can it work between Lebanon and Israel? Yes, I believe we can have an end of this conflict. We had a UN Security Council resolution in 2006 that ended that war, so it was successful in ending the war on UN Security Council Resolution 1701, but nobody implemented it. Right. No one. No party to this conflict, and everybody blames the other, but the reality is no one implemented it.
But why will they implement it now? I mean, I know you were calling for it this week, you were calling for them to reintroduce it and put it into place.
So I'm not, on the contrary, I said when I was in Lebanon this week that simply saying that you are going to implement 1701 is not enough. That day's over. You can't just say, no, but this time I mean it. Well, you said you meant it last time, you didn't do a damn thing. So we have to put mechanisms in place to enforce it and to make sure that it is implemented and to let the Lebanese armed forces actually be deployed in South Lebanon and to do its job. And for that, it needs support from the international community and from the people of Lebanon, from the government of Lebanon. As long as they exercise sovereignty, I think we can solve this. And I think the same goes for the Israelis. They have to implement it. So we have to get to a point. Are we there today? No, but that's what we're working towards. And I do believe that it is possible.
So the question maybe then, and this goes to the economic arrangement and the maritime accord too, are we talking to the right actors? Because obviously the non-state actors are the ones who played a big role both October 7th and the subsequent war in Lebanon. Is it possible that you can create the incentives for the state actors but not for the non-state actors?
Look, you clearly have a dynamic that non-state actors want Lebanon to be in economic despair, and they don't want prosperity. But what I do believe, and look, I was told during the maritime negotiations that Hezbollah was against it, they were never going to be for it, but the overwhelming support in the Lebanese street for it is what forced it to happen. And today, are we talking to the right people? I think we are. It's complicated, it's hard. There are people we don't talk to directly, we have to talk indirectly, but I think that we know how to do that.
Amos Hochstein, U.S. Special Envoy and Senior Advisor to President Biden for Energy and Investments at the Semaphore World Economy Summit in Washington, D.C. Story from NBC News. North Korean troops will begin fighting alongside Russian forces as soon as this weekend, Ukraine said Friday, adding new urgency to a stunning turn in the war that has alarmed the Kremlin's foes but may also be causing a headache for its friends. John Kirby, White House National Security Communications Advisor, held a virtual audio news conference today. Question coming from Jake Epstein, Senior Defense Reporter for Business Insider.
President Zelensky said today that the first North Korean soldiers are expected to deploy by Russia to combat zones as early as Sunday. I'm wondering if the White House can confirm this or has any additional information on the potential deployment.
We're monitoring this very, very closely, and we're continuing to consult with the intelligence community to see what more we can glean. I will go so far today as to say that it is possible that there are now more than 3,000 troops from North Korea that are that have been dispatched to Russia for outfitting and for training. The other day I said it was about 3,000. We believe that it's possible, and we're looking into reports that the number could be north of that. I can't give you a specific estimate at this time, but as we said the other day, it was entirely possible that that number could change, and we are closely examining the reports about that, in fact, happening. On where they're going to go and what they're going to be deployed to do, if they're going to be deployed, I don't have firm intelligence assessments that I can speak to today about that. We're still, again, watching closely to see what's afoot. That said, we believe that it is certainly possible, and I just go so far as to say perhaps even likely that at least some of these North Korean troops could be deployed to the Kursk area, but in what capacity, for what purpose, that still remains unclear. So this is going to be, and I mean, I hope it's coming across this way. This is going to be an evolving situation. We will share with you what we can, and we'll give you an honest assessment of our confidence in that as we go along. But that's kind of where we are here on Friday afternoon.
John Kirby, White House National Security spokesperson, on a virtual audio news conference today. Associated Press writes that Russia's central bank on Friday raised its key interest rate by 2 percentage points to a record high 21% in an effort to stem growing inflation as massive government spending on the military amid the fighting in Ukraine strains the economy's capacity to produce goods and services and drives up workers' wages. From the Washington Examiner, the head of NASA has called for an investigation into the allegations that Elon Musk has been in regular communication with Russian President Vladimir Putin since late 2022. Musk, the world's richest man, has developed deep business ties with the U.S. military and intelligence agencies over the last several years, while seemingly maintaining a simultaneous relationship with one of America's biggest adversarial leaders, the Wall Street Journal reported on Thursday. That was via the Washington Examiner. Administrator Nelson spoke with Burgess Everett, Semaphore News Congressional Bureau Chief, at the Semaphore World Economy Summit in Washington.
You mentioned SpaceX first, not me. Do you have any comment on this story in the Wall Street Journal about Elon Musk talking to Vladimir Putin?
Well, as I say, we are nonpartisan political. In this regard, we're like the Department of Defense. My dealings, NASA's dealings with SpaceX are primarily with Gwynne Shotwell. She is the president. And Elon Musk leaves it to her to run SpaceX. And they have been phenomenally successful. As you can see with their Dragon spacecraft, their Falcon 9 rocket, and now the developing of the Starship, which is to take the lander to the moon. But you ask about the Wall Street Journal. I don't know that that story is true. I think it should be investigated. If the story is true, that there have been multiple conversations between Elon Musk and the president of Russia, then I think that would be concerning.
Yeah.
Particularly for NASA, for the Department of Defense, for some of the intelligence agencies.
Okay, fair enough. Well, I'm sure we'll see more about this in the coming days, hopefully.
NASA Administrator Bill Nelson speaking with Burgess Everett, Semaphore News Congressional Bureau Chief at the Semaphore World Economy Summit today. Back to the Washington Examiner article. Last year, Elon Musk's companies had almost 100 contracts with 17 federal agencies, according to the New York Times. Earlier this year, NASA announced it had selected SpaceX to develop a space vehicle that will bring the International Space Station out of orbit in 2030 after the operational life of the ISS ends. The contract has an approximate value of more than $800 million, and SpaceX previously won a $1.8 billion classified contract in 2021, and Musk had a security clearance that allows him to access certain classified information. That was reporting from the Washington Examiner. NASA Administrator Nelson also answered questions today about space exploration, including one on the timeline for humans to reach Mars.
We're out of time, but I have to ask you one thing before we go, because my kids are going to ask me when I get home, are they going to see someone go to Mars in their lifetime? Is that?
Amen.
Yeah? I can tell them that the NASA administrator told me that humans are going to Mars?
You mark it down, the decade of the 2040s.
Okay.
We are getting everything we need to know about how to sustain human life in that very hostile atmosphere. Not 3 or 4 days to the moon, but the months that it will take to go to Mars. And by the way, Matt Damon showed that we can raise potatoes on Mars. That's not too far off, by the way. I have actually seen plants growing in a university in lunar soil that we brought back a half a century ago.
Well, I got a scoop for my kids then, too.
There you go.
NASA Administrator Bill Nelson at the Semaphore World Economy Summit in Washington. A Semaphore article on the exchange you just heard includes this. Nelson's estimation of when humans will be on Mars is slightly further away than Elon Musk's more urgent ambitions, which are to land on Mars within the next 4 years and have a self-sustaining city by 2040. On Wall Street today, the Dow down 259, NASDAQ up 103, S&P down 1. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Subscribe to C-SPAN's free evening newsletter Word for Word and get the stories making headlines in Washington sent to your inbox every day. Sign up at cspan.org/connect. Have a good night and weekend.